This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Robin Cotter, April 2007. Summer by Edith Wharton. Chapter 15. That night, as usual, they said good-bye at the wood's edge. Harney was to leave the next morning early. He asked Charity to say nothing of their plans till his return, and strangely, even to herself, she was glad of the postponement. A leaden weight of shame hung on her, benumbing every other sensation, and she bade him good-bye with hardly a sign of emotion. His reiterated promises to return seemed almost wounding. She had no doubt that he intended to come back. Her doubts were far deeper and less definable. Since the fanciful vision of the future that had flitted through her imagination at their first meeting, she had hardly ever thought of his marrying her. She had not had to put the thought from her mind. It had not been there. If ever she looked ahead, she felt instinctively that the gulf between them was too deep, and that the bridge their passion had flung across it was as insubstantial as a rainbow. But she seldom looked ahead. Each day was so rich that it absorbed her. Now her first feeling was that everything would be different, and that she herself would be a different being to Harney. Instead of remaining separate and absolute, she would be compared with other people, and unknown things would be expected of her. She was too proud to be afraid, but the freedom of her spirit drooped. Harney had not fixed any date for his return. He had said he would have to look about first and settle things. He had promised to write as soon as there was anything definite to say, and had left her his address, and asked her to write also. But the address frightened her. It was in New York, at a club with a long name in Fifth Avenue. It seemed to raise an insurmountable barrier between them. Once or twice, in the first days, she got out a sheet of paper and sat looking at it, and trying to think what to say, but she had the feeling that her letter would never reach its destination. She had never written to anyone farther away than Hepburn. Harney's first letter came after he had been gone about 10 days. It was tender but grave, and bore no resemblance to the gay little notes he had sent her by the freckled boy from Creston River. He spoke positively of his intention of coming back, but named no date, and reminded Charity of their agreement that their plans should not be divulged till he had had time to "settle things." When that would be, he could not yet foresee, but she could count on his returning as soon as the way was clear. She read the letter with a strange sense of its coming from immeasurable distances, and having lost most of its meaning on the way. And in reply she sent him a coloured postcard of Creston Falls, on which she wrote, "With love from Charity." She felt the pitiful inadequacy of this, and understood, with a sense of despair, that in her inability to express herself she must give him an impression of coldness and reluctance, but she could not help it. She could not forget that he had never spoken to her of marriage till Mr. Royal had forced the word from his lips. Though she had not had the strength to shake off the spell that bound her to him, she had lost all spontaneity of feeling, and seemed to herself to be passively awaiting a fate she could not avert. She had not seen Mr. Royal on her return to the Red House. The morning after her parting from Harney, when she came down from her room, Verena told her that her guardian had gone off to Worcester and Portland. It was the time of year when he usually reported to the insurance agencies he represented, and there was nothing unusual in his departure except its suddenness. She thought little about him, except to be glad he was not there. She kept to herself for the first days, while North Dormer was recovering from its brief plunge into publicity, and the subsiding agitation left her unnoticed. But the faithful Ally could not be long avoided. For the first few days after the close of the Old Home Week festivities, Charity escaped her by roaming the hills all day when she was not at her post in the library. But after that a period of rain set in, and one pouring afternoon, Ally, sure that she would find her friend indoors, came around to the Red House with her sewing. The two girls sat upstairs in Charity's room. Charity, her idle hands in her lap, was sunk in a kind of leaden dream. through which she was only half conscious of Ally, who sat opposite her in a low, rush-bottomed chair, her work pinned to her knee, and her thin lips pursed up as she bent above it. "It was my idea, running a ribbon through the gauging," she said proudly, drawing back to contemplate the blouse she was trimming. "It's for Miss Balch. She was awfully pleased." She paused, and then added, with a queer tremor in her piping voice, "I daren't have told her I got the idea from one I saw in Julia." Charity raised her eyes listlessly. "Do you still see Julia sometimes?" Ally reddened, as if the allusion had escaped her unintentionally. "Oh, it was such a long time ago I seen her with those gaugings." Silence fell again, and Ally presently continued, "Miss Balch left me a whole lot of things to do over this time." "Why? Has she gone?" Charity inquired, with an inner start of apprehension. "Didn't you know? She went off the morning after they had the celebration at Hamblin. I seen her drive by early with Mr. Harney." There was another silence, measured by the steady tick of the rain against the window, and at intervals by the snipping sound of Ally's scissors. Ally gave a meditative laugh. "Do you know what she told me before she went away? She told me she was going to send for me to come over to Springfield and make some things for her wedding." Charity again lifted her heavy lids and stared at Ally's pale, pointed face, which moved to and fro above her moving fingers. "Is she going to get married?" Ally let the blouse sink to her knee, and sat gazing at it. Her lips seemed suddenly dry, and she moistened them a little with her tongue. "Why, I presume so, from what she said. Didn't you know?" "Why should I know?" Ally did not answer. She bent above the blouse, and began picking out a basting thread with the point of the scissors. "Why should I know?" Charity repeated harshly. "I didn't know but what folks here say she's engaged to Mr. Harney." Charity stood up with a laugh, and stretched her arms lazily above her head. "If all the people got married that folks say are going to, you'd have your time full making wedding dresses," she said ironically. "Why, don't you believe it?" Ally ventured. "It would not make it true if I did, nor prevent it if I didn't." "That's so. I only know I seen her crying the night of the party because her dress didn't set right. That's why she wouldn't dance any." Charity stood absently gazing down at the lacy garment on Ally's knee. Abruptly she stooped and snatched it up. "Well, I guess she won't dance in this either," she said with sudden violence, and grasping the blouse in her strong young hands, she tore it in two and flung the tattered bits to the floor. "Oh, Charity!" Ally cried, springing up. For a long interval the two girls faced each other across the ruined garment. Ally burst into tears. "Oh, what'll I say to her? What'll I do? It was real lace!" she wailed between her piping sobs. Charity glared at her unrelentingly. "You oughtn't to have brought it here," she said, breathing quickly. "I hate other people's clothes. It's just as if they was there themselves." The two stared at each other again over this avowal, till Charity brought out, in a gasp of anguish, "Oh, go, 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 or I'll hate you too." When Ally left her, she fell sobbing across her bed. The long storm was followed by a northwest gale, and when it was over, the hills took on their first umber tints, the sky grew more densely blue, and the big white clouds lay against the hills like snowbanks. The first crisp maple leaves began to spin across Miss Hatchard's lawn, and the Virginia creeper on the memorial splashed the white porch with scarlet. It was a golden, triumphant September. Day by day the flame of the Virginia creeper spread to the hillsides in wider waves of carmine and crimson. The larches glowed like the thin yellow halo above a fire. The maples blazed and smouldered, and the black hemlocks turned to indigo against the incandescence of the forest. The nights were cold, with a dry glitter of stars so high up that they seemed smaller and more vivid. Sometimes, as Charity lay sleepless on her bed through the long hours, she felt as though she were bound to those wheeling fires, and swinging with them around the great black vault. At night she planned many things. It was then she wrote to Harney, but the letters were never put on paper, for she did not know how to express what she wanted to tell him. so she waited.